Welcome to this director's commentary for The Fields. This was my first movie, and I'm going to get this out of the way as the opening credits start. I could say a lot of things about the making of this motion picture, but I'm going to choose not to keep in spirit with the making of the movie and not to sound like it sounds like sour grapes or just me complaining about making it. When I was a kid, or actually when I was younger, older than a kid, I remember Steven Spielberg in an interview said, Jaws was a movie that was a lot of fun to watch, but it wasn't a fun movie to make. And I never understood that until, well, basically, I made The Fields. And I will start out by saying you can see here the cinematography is beautiful. And yes, it is based on the true events of what happened to me as a boy growing up on my grandparents' farm in the summer of 1973, late summer, early fall of 73. The events took place over a period of about 2 weeks. But before I get into that, making The Fields for me was a very miserable experience. And everything not to do in filmmaking, I learned in making The Fields. I did not direct this motion picture. I wrote it and I produced it. I shot it in an area where I live, so kind of shooting it in my backyard kind of thing. And I'll get into a lot of that coming up momentarily. However, making the movie was not a fun experience at all, but I did learn. So, to use those old phrases, I guess it was kind of my baptism by fire kind of thing. So, I'm glad people enjoyed The Fields. It's done very, very well. It received a lot of critical acclaim. It did well financially, ran a long, long time on Netflix, and really brought attention to both Cloris Leachman and Tara Reid. I will say, working with both celebrities was the absolute most positive experience I had on this set. I loved working with both women very, very much. And I'm so glad I got to, especially now that we've recently lost Cloris Leachman. So I guess the best thing is right, let's just get into this. And if you're interested, you can just see how we made this. I am happy to say you saw that one credit that, yes, that is the Tommy Lee Wallace who helped co-produce this. Tommy's kind of like my mentor in the entertainment industry, my Obi-Wan. And I've always been a fan of Tommy's, especially for Halloween 3 and Fright Night 2. Yes, he did Stephen King's It, the original miniseries. But for me, Tommy, it will always be his low-budget work that I loved with him coming up the ranks. He also did Vampires 2 as well. And I wanted Tommy to be involved in this as a thank you. So here we go. We found a real 1971 Mach 1 Mustang. My neighbor is a collector. And we got that. And then for the stunt scenes, we actually procured a real Mach 1 Mustang for a stunt double. We actually had it painted to look just like the real picture car, as they call it, for later on you'll see in the movie. This is Joshua Orman, who plays the younger me in this film. And he was a great kid. He went on to do Let's Be Cops, I believe, and a number of other things. He came from the world of commercials. That's how we found him, through a Philadelphia casting agency. And, he did a really nice job in this. And then went on, of course, like I said, with Patton Oswalt to do Let's Be Cops and a number of other things. You see the Godzilla model on the shelf. And Godzilla, this was interesting because we wanted to use Godzilla in this, but Toho would not grant us permission to use the Godzilla trademark. But that model that you see right there in the foreground, I used to have that exact model, and pieces of the model would glow in the dark. They were like white. And of course, you could paint the model any way that you wanted. However, for me, it was important to have Godzilla in there because Godzilla was kind of like my security blanket. And how we were able to get the model in there, you're probably saying, well, Harrison, if you couldn't use Godzilla, what's he doing in there? And the answer is because those models at the time were made by a company called Aurora, which went out of business, and then was acquired by a company called Polar Lights, which also went out of business. There was a loophole to allow this to happen, to use the model, since it was not a direct license of Toho's character, it was through a defunct company, and we were able to legally exploit that. So Godzilla does factor in for the most part. We shot this in Kunkletown, Pennsylvania, and I chose this town not only because I pretty much lived in that area, but because the town very much looks like it hasn't changed in over 40 years. Just take the cars out of the driveways and boom, it's the 1970s all over again. So we were lucky to also surround ourselves with a bunch of terrific character actors. And this gentleman right here plays my grandfather in the film. My grandfather in real life was a chief of police of a town called East Bangor. But we juxtapose some things here because, look, as you know, these based on true events things always take narrative license for the sake of the story to keep the story moving. In real life, my real life grandfather, who was the chief, never once was involved in what will take place on my grandparents' farm whatsoever. This is Faust Chicho, who plays my father. And then, of course, Tara Reid in this scene right here plays my mother alongside Susan Moses. And there was a lot of hard-hitting stuff here in making this. My mother had just recently died, only about a year or so before the making of this movie. So she never got to see me make it in the film industry. She came close. She died at 59 from emphysema, and she was basically, toward the end of her life, a 3-pack-a-day smoker. And so I wanted my mother accurately portrayed in this. I think it's hard to do that when you're trying to do the kind of warts and all portrayal. My mother was not a perfect mother, and she was a very young mother. She was 18 when she had me. So a lot of that comes out in this scene, especially with her talking to her mother that she will not allow her son to stay with her own mother simply because she alludes to the fact that her stepfather might be inappropriately touching her, molesting her, things like that in the bath. So she's taking her son, Stephen, that's his name in here, although the boy is me, taking him to, of all things, her estranged husband's parents, which is Gladys and Heine, which are my real grandparents, and I'll be getting into that momentarily. My mom did have a Volkswagen Beetle, and one thing I'm really, really impressed with this movie was the art design and production design. They really worked to make sure that everything felt in the era. I mean, if you look in the back, that Afghan stretched across the back seat, that's from the 70s. They went to thrift shops and estate sales and yard sales to find these things. This Beetle was donated by a guy named Dave Snyder. This is a real 1973 Beetle. All he wanted in return was for Tara Reid to autograph the glove box, which she did. And I believe he sold this. I actually ran into him a couple months ago before this recording, and he had told me that he sold the VW and Tara Reid's signature on that glove box. The person who bought it was really excited that Tara Reid used this Beetle in the movie. This was a real farm that we were allowed to use and basically tear the whole inside of the house up. Like that porch on the front, production added that porch because we needed a front porch on the shanty. And we were able to change the entire inside of the house because it was pretty much gutted. The owner was going to be remodeling the whole inside, so we caught him at the right time. This is Bev Appleton, who plays my grandfather. And Heine, his real name was Harrison, but when he was a little boy, his younger sister couldn't say Harrison, so she called him Heine. And that's how she pronounced it. And of course, that's who I'm named after. Cloris and Tara sitting here at this table. This is a great scene between the two of them and a lot of stuff behind this. Cloris had demanded to have a fat suit put under her clothing because my grandmother was very top heavy. Cloris cut her hair and dyed her hair upon arriving on set to look exactly like my grandmother. Cloris spent 5 days sitting with me, reviewing video of my grandmother, listening to how she talked, how she dressed, how she walked. She looked at the photos. She became my grandmother. I can't emphasize that enough. Watching this right now, even as I'm recording these notes and commentary, this is the closest I'm ever getting to seeing my grandmother alive again. Cloris did not play my grandmother, she channeled her. Now, Cloris would not smoke real cigarettes. That was a pet peeve of hers. She hated it. I can't blame her because that's what killed my mother in real life. And she smoked clove cigarettes here, and she would not inhale. She would only hold. You'll notice you'll never see her smoking the fake cigarette in this. She hated it. So she was excited about this role because she said, there really aren't any dramatic roles for women my age anymore. Cloris was 83 at the time of making this movie. And the fat suit thing, believe it or not, was needed because Cloris, even at 83, was still pretty shapely and active. She had just hurt her knee skiing in Vail when she came to us. So I remember the wardrobe designer refused to get a fat suit, saying that the clothes were already tailored and blah, blah, blah. And it became a problem with the directors. And I had to step in because, again, Cloris won an Oscar. If she wants a fat suit, she'll get it. So she didn't have it for this scene. And her weight is actually rags stuffed into her outfit since she didn't have to get up and move around to put that weight on her upper body. And when the fat suit arrived the following day from Philadelphia, she was 100% right. She looked fantastic in it and really completed the image of my grandmother. This was her very first scene in the film shot, which is her very first scene as you see her in the movie. And Tara Reid did a wonderful job at my mother, definitely portraying that inner turmoil and the fact that she really fucked things up and that it isn't all just her husband, it's her as well too. And I'm gonna say, I won't get deep into my family issues on this, but I will say that my father comes out looking like the hero in this, while I really gave, I think, more of a slanted negative view of my mother, especially here because, she's dumping me off at my grandmother's, which she did do while she claimed to go and try to patch things up with her marriage. But really, my mom was kind of a party girl. I love my mother. And let me put it for the record. She became a terrific mother the older she got. She was extremely young when she had me. She was 18, as I had said. So leaving me with my grandmother was fun for me. I loved my nanny. That's what I called her. She was Nanny. And Nanny was always drilling fear into me. And in this scene is so important that the directors got it right, because she would warn me, don't go in that corn, because the farm was surrounded by 3 sides of corn and it went on for miles. It was like living in Iowa, but it was actually in eastern Pennsylvania. And here she is giving me hell. And she would warn me, you stay out of the corn, because if you go in there, you'll get lost, you'll die, your body will turn black from rotting, and the crows will peck your eyes out. That's her. It's so perfect the way she did it. Now, our farmhouse in real life was one level. It was a small, almost like a Cape Cod kind of small farmhouse, like a 2-3 bedroom farmhouse. So this farmhouse in this movie is far bigger with 2 levels, nothing at all like it was in real life, but it worked. Now here I am playing with my toys. Again, because of licensing and copyright, we couldn't use Gigan or Ghidorah. We couldn't use any of them. So I have to pretend that these are my kaiju dinosaurs. And the music that John Avarice uses here, of course, invokes big monster, Ifukube kind of Godzilla music. So we used a real raven in this. It is not a crow. It's supposed to be a crow. And we used a raven in this because the bird lures the boy into the corn. Now, what I didn't know is that ravens are easy to make fly. The real catch is making them walk. This raven's name was Jewel. She was actually quite famous and in a number of horror and thriller movies. She was taught to walk by throwing food on the ground, and she would follow the food. The problem is when a bird is full, that's it. They're done for the day. Jewel cost us $8,000 a day. She had to come back for an unplanned second day. So you see what I mean by cost overruns when I talk about this on Twitter and on my cinema podcast. There is the bird hopping. It's supposed to give off the impression that either it's injured or is it just duping the boy into the corn. And this did not really happen in real life. When we get to the scene, I'll tell you exactly how this whole mess started in real life. But this was a dramatic moment to introduce the cornfield. And what I love is that the cinematography really starts to shape the corn is almost a character, kind of like the Overlook Hotel in The Shining. I thought The Shining's biggest positive out of that film was that they made that hotel a villain. And I think they made the corn a villain in this. And just so you know, no CGI on this at all. This was before CGI was really taking off. So that sky is the real sky. And when you see that iron gray sky above the cornfield, that's all real right there. That's all real. No green screen, no nothing. That's the way it looked that day. And Dan Watchalonis was our cinematographer. And again, I just can't tell you what a great job that he did. So you'll notice they shot this deliberately. And I like this kind of metaphoric, artistic shot, because the sky is very bleak. But as he goes deeper into the corn and away from the badness that is his family life and everything, you'll notice the corn gets greener, the sky will get bluer, and eventually the sun will come out. So it's almost like we've gone deeper into this boy's imagination. And I like that the directors tried this kind of artistic bent with it. That the corn inside, even though it's evil on the outside of its shell, it's almost like it's luring you into its van kind of thing. Because once you get in there, well, it seems like a really nice place, doesn't it? I mean, look at the rich greens and blues and yellows. It looks like a terrific place, but it's a trap. The corn is not friendly, and the corn is not there to help our young protagonist. So as Joshua, also known as Stephen, moves deeper into this corn, he's going to find clues. Now, in real life, I did find something in the corn. I did not find a body, but I did find a bloody mattress with hypodermic needles stuck in it, blood all over the mattress, and lots of pornography. Magazines all over, pages ripped out. So something really funky was going on back here. I did find bottles. I found alcohol bottles, things like that. So it was really interesting to see how the directors interpreted this. They wanted to ratchet some things up. I feel it is only proper to point out where the story actually diverges from, the real story. So, I like keeping things real that way. I mean, I could just sit here and lie and say, yeah, I found a body. I don't want to do that. So we find these kind of trinkets and clues. I can't really say I was excited about that, almost like, they were left there like breadcrumbs. But again, I wasn't directing. It was the director's choice, and that's fine. But the boy goes deeper, and then he starts hearing the flies. Now, here was where we really did very little CGI work. The flies are digital. You really can't wrangle flies. I mean, I guess you can if you have some type of entomologist on set, which we didn't have the budget for. So the flies that you see here are all CGI flies. Everything flying in the camera and around the bloody mattress and stuff, those are all digital. And of course, right there, I think they look good, right? I mean, when you look at them, they look pretty decent, There's one of the hypodermics, a pipe. I did find all these bizarre things. And this is when he's going to, of course, find what will ratchet things up higher. And there is the reveal. And now you notice the sky has changed. It's back to a steel gray. There's danger. He's running back to the danger that is on his farm. All of this, a lot of foreshadowing of what's to come. And I love this, the way that I do like this scene very much, the way that he's finally caught up by Heine with all of this. It really works out really, really well when he gets caught. It's a good jump scare because you think he's caught by someone else. And this was all done with a Steadicam, running backwards and then to the side to catch him. And I love this part here with my grandmother because she used to scream and yell just like this about staying out of that goddamn corn. My grandmother swore like a truck driver. Every other word out of her mouth was fuck or fucking. That's how she did it, with her cigarette in hand. Everything was a vulgarity. What the directors really nailed well here were all the dinner table scenes and the family scenes. This is exactly what my grandmother was. And she'd yell at my grandfather at the table because he'd feed the dogs food, he'd give them ice cream, and he would get these dogs fat, and it would drive her crazy. And so my grandfather would always say, well, maybe I'll take Boo Boo, that was my nickname, down to the hotel. The hotel was this place called Euler's Hotel in Easton. And we would go out shopping, we'd run some errands, and then on the way back, he would stop at the hotel, and he would always have a shot and a beer. And he would get me a Hershey bar and some soda and a bunch of quarters to play the pinball machine. That kept me busy while he just sat and enjoyed his beer and his shot, but my grandmother would give him shit every time he came home. She could smell the booze on his breath, and she couldn't stand the fact that he had stopped by the hotel. So here's again where she's scaring me, telling me what I will look like if I go into the corn and what happens when you die. And my grandfather, he was just always amused by everything. But I'm telling you, this is exactly the dynamic that I grew up with, sitting around the table with these two. My grandfather was a jokester. He was also an Army veteran. And he knew how to handle my grandmother. They argued all the time, but they loved each other. Sometimes I wonder, what are they doing married? Because they just, all they did was argue and bitch. And he would take his hearing aid and he would turn it off, or he would take it out and put it in the drawer so he didn't have to hear her anymore. My grandfather had this great green truck. In the movie, it's an American truck. In real life, it was this green Datsun, back when it was called Datsun. And I used to love going on rides with him. He was very practical, very pragmatic kind of guy. And I did tell him I saw weird things in the corn, such as the mattress. But my grandfather was convinced that I watched too many horror movies with my grandmother, which I'll be getting into in a little bit. My biggest fear was that this was all the work of Charles Manson. They had arrested Manson and got him and his family at the end of the 60s, and then they were sentenced to death. But then in the 70s, their sentence was commuted to life. And Manson was always in the news, and then Helter Skelter had come out, the book and everything. And there was a lot of talk about Manson, and I was convinced that Charles Manson was going to get me, that him and his girls were going to get me. So my grandfather is taking me to a place called the Milk Farm. That's what we called it. In real life, it was a dairy called, I think, Fancy Furrows, I think is what it was called, in Easton. And you can look it up. And but on the way, we would stop at what we used to just call the store. And here you can see right there the missing on the front door, a little foreshadowing there. Obviously, that's the girl that was found in the cornfield. Here's my big cameo in this movie, just so you know. I'll get to that in a moment. The candy that you all see here is genuine penny candy, and those wacky packages we wrote to Tops, and they sent us. I used to collect these as a kid back in the early 70s, and they sent us some genuine ones for free to feature in the movie. I have not seen these since, my God, Nixon was in office, and they sent us a bunch of these. They were all parodies of products. Now, my grandfather will call to me. I will run. If you look way in the back, right there I am, taking it down. That's me, the real me, taking a Godzilla model off the shelf. Now, this birdcage scene is great. I'm not going to give you the punchline until you actually watch it. If you're watching these commentaries, I assume you've already seen the movie and you're just looking for the extras here. But the birdcage story is 1,000% true. And you'll get that punchline coming up in a moment when we get back to the house. So then I'll tell you the full story there. This is supposed to be the milk farm. In reality, it was a far bigger place with an actual general store in the front, not just kind of an old-time farmer that sold milk out of his barn. But hey, it worked, and it gives a nice atmosphere. This guy was terrific that allowed us to shoot here. He gave us carte blanche. Mr. Field, his name was. He gave us carte blanche, for the whole farm. And look at this production value. I mean, real cow stables. It was just terrific. Now, the guy who comes after me here, this guy really existed. His name was not Eugene. That's what we give him in the film, to change his name. And again, if you've seen the film, then you know Eugene's fate, but maybe I'll just keep that quiet just in case you haven't. You really should watch the film before you listen to all of this. But this guy would find me. And I'm not kidding. He would, no matter where I was on that damn farm, this guy would find me. And he always started with, he'd come at me and he'd smile at me. And he would just be like, hey, you still like Godzilla? And I'd always be like, yeah, I like Godzilla. I liked him last week when I was here. You know, it was always the same thing, but he was always in my face, a very close talker, and he was obsessed with me. There is no doubt about it. Now, in real life, my hair was nowhere near as curly as this kid's hair. It was very straight, but very blonde and very long. And I was a very outgoing kid. In this movie, Steven is portrayed as kind of recalcitrant and kind of tight-lipped and withdrawn, but that's not how I was at all. But this guy, this is accurate. This is how he would get with me. He'd get really close. Now, my grandfather would break it up, and he'd always be like, come on, let's go. And he was always polite to the guy, but it was very clear he didn't want me hanging around him. Now, I don't know if this was deliberate or accidental, but the way that it is shot, and I don't know if the directors chose to do this, but it does work. It kind of looks like, if you look at Eugene there on the left, kind of looks like he has an erection. Now, he doesn't. It's just the waistline of his pants and the belt buckle. But doesn't it kind of look like he pitched a tent there after talking to me? It does seem like that. And I'll get into, after this movie came out, I went to a dinner party where a psychologist was there. And she saw the film and liked it very much. And she said, would you like me to give you my interpretation of what I think happened? And I said, yes, I'll tell you all about that in a little bit. See, there are benefits, to listening to this, to these extras. These girls actually existed. Now, they really made them look like Manson girls in this. In real life, they didn't look so much like Manson girls, but they were hippie girls. And this scene was important because one day when we were leaving, this girl actually did this. She said, hey, little boy, what's your name? And my grandfather made it clear, don't talk to them. And that point right there is extremely important because I'm telling you, I think she marked us. That's exactly what I think, because it was not long after this that it all started. And there were other people with those girls. That guy right there, who is actually the director of the movie, Tom Matera, and he's talking to Eugene right there. And Eugene, of course, is looking at me in the truck, again, focusing on some type of obsession or fascination he had with me. That guy shuffling out of the bar right there was the real owner of the farmhouse that we used. We gave him a cameo. And in the back, the guy with the red cap in the back, which is not a Trump hat. This is years before Trump. That is the other director, Dave Mazzoni. Now, if you look way down at the end of the bar, at the window, the guy with the baseball cap at the end of the bar by the window is Tommy Lee Wallace, the director of Halloween 3, who also played Michael Myers in some spots in the original Halloween and edited Halloween and art designed it, the whole thing. So that's really cool. I got Tommy in it. This place served as the bar, the hotel. And I really love it. It actually looks very much like the real hotel did. We brought a pinball machine in from the 70s just for authenticity. Again, the production design and the art design to this, I can't rave enough about. But this place actually exists in real life. It's called Penny's Tavern, Penny's Bar, and it is in Kunkletown, PA. You can actually call that number that you saw on the sign outside. It's really there. Penny Young is the woman who owns it, and they were very kind to us. And this, again, is where we have the whole scene going on, giving some backstory to the bad home life that Steven has, that I have. And, it just kind of gives that backdrop. This guy right here was actually the one who was originally going to play Heine, and we liked him a lot. But then we saw Bev, and Bev looked far more like the real Heine than this guy. But both were, his name is Buck, I believe. Both were terrific actors and loved working with him as the bartender. He was just terrific. But Penny's Place, that's what it really was. You can see in the back, that's what reminds me. It's not Penny's Tavern. Penny's Place is a real place. And they were kind enough to let us shoot here over a period of, I think, 3 days to get everything that we needed. But the look, don't you think the look has a definite 70s look to it? I mean, that's what I really love about watching this movie is the art and production design. Even that sunset right there. They got that crane shot by a very simple apparatus, almost like a seesaw to raise the camera up. And this scene is very important to me as he's carrying that bird cage. My grandfather actually said this joke to me. I mean, he loved my grandmother, but he actually said to me one time, looking out at the field and his pumpkins and his garden. He loved his garden so much. That was where he could go to get away from my grandmother. But he said, I could bury her in here and no one would ever know. And there he is saying it. And I remember at first it was like, what? And then he would give this laugh. And then I knew he was joking, but it's a good scene. I really love that scene. It's a good quiet moment, and it really happened. And then here we go with the birdcage, and boom. She did say Band-Aids because Heine would take his hearing aid out and not listen to her. And I remember the scene so well when she came out of the living room, the cigarette in her mouth, and she saw that bird cage, and she's like, what the fuck is that? And he said, well, that's your bird cage. She goes, you dumb fuck. We don't even own a bird. I said Band-Aids. And, so I love that he totally, and he didn't care. He was just like, yeah, well, what are you going to do? And he looked at me like, well, so I screwed that one up. And think about that, the logic of it, that we didn't even own a bird. He just picked it up because Gladys said so. Here you're seeing on TV the news where I would ask her all the time about Manson. They were always on the news, and she would tell me right here in detail the graphic murders of Sharon Tate and the LaBiancas. I mean, I would go to bed with this in my head. And this was in the movie when it all started. It will start to start ramping up. But as I always say with this movie, in real life, it started with a stick. And we'll get to that in a moment. But yes, watching late night TV with my grandmother was a big thing. And I used to watch late night horror movies with her as well. But there are the girls. And my grandmother told me they're crazier than Charles Manson. They were the worst. And they only, Charles Manson only gave orders, she said. He didn't kill anyone. He ordered the girls. So that would scare the hell out of me. I did not have this bank in real life, although that is creepy. I'm not one who buys into the whole creepy clown thing. I think a lot of people say they are scared of clowns, but they're really not all that scared of clowns. They just say it for the attention. So I'll get into that in a little bit too. But if you look, that Carol Burnett picture is the real autograph from Carol Burnett that my grandmother, Nanny, right here, got me in 1973. She wrote to Carol Burnett because we would sit up and we watched the Carol Burnett show on Saturday nights at 10 o'clock, right after Bob Newhart. So it was a real big deal to watch all that. And she got me a Carol Burnett autograph, which was real. I wanted to make sure it was in the movie. And it still sits in my office right now. So I still have it. But my grandmother would come in to tuck me in. And there's Godzilla. She loved tucking me in and singing me nursery rhymes. And the interesting thing about my grandmother coming up in this scene here is, and maybe I'm just remembering it wrong or it didn't happen as much, but my grandmother could fart on command. And I don't know how the hell she did it. But here she is singing me the song. It was, the Pop Goes the Weasel, and then she'd fart. And that would make me laugh and put my mind at ease. And sometimes she'd fart really loud and I would say, Nanny, and she would just go, that wasn't me, that was a rabbit on a motorcycle. And I don't know, when you're a kid, somehow you fucking believe it. I don't get it. So here, you'll hear her yell at the dogs and you hear, oh, shut the fuck up, Trixie. And, some reviewers said, oh, all Cloris Leachman does in this movie is talk, filthy and fart. You didn't get this movie at all because you're not understanding. That was really my grandmother. So yeah, I guess if all she did was swear and fart, then I guess so. Now here, this scene is important because we have Brian Anthony Wilson in this, and many of you may know him from a number of movies, but also on The Wire. And he's one of my favorite actors that I've ever worked with all time. And here is Gladys saying goodbye to her sister Tootie. Now, Tootie in real life was my grandmother's sister, and she was white, and she was married to a black man named Charlie, and Charlie was the first black person I ever saw. And right away, people go, oh, racist, racist. No, it's not. I lived in a small town where it was all fucking white people. And I went to school with all white kids. There were no black kids in my class. There were no minorities in my class. That doesn't make me a bad person in this cancel culture, politically correct world. It was what it was. That was reality. So the first time that I saw Charlie, he was a very big man. And the only difference between Brian, who is a big man in real life, is his skin color. Charlie was much darker, like really dark skinned, where Brian is more light skinned. But he was the first dark man, black man that I had seen. And I was very nervous around him. In real life, Charlie couldn't have been more kind and more sweet. And I loved him as I got to know him. He would come up to my grandmother's house with Tootie, who was usually drunk, always drinking, and he would cook us fried chicken on this big grill. And I remember I had somebody in an interview say, oh, well, that's racist. How the hell is that racist? That's what he did. He loved fried chicken. How is that racist? How is that a stereotype? It's what it really was, you dumbass. And I hate to get like that on a commentary, but my God, you get sick of this with these social justice warriors. It's really how it happened. I didn't make it up, and I didn't write it as a cliche. It's really what it was. So I was very scared of him at first. And this is actually pretty accurate because, like I said, I wasn't always so tight-lipped as a little boy. But in real life, meeting Charlie, I was. And of course, you always go to your grandmother. And Tootie was great too. I mean, she just really nailed it. This actress just nailed it with playing Tootie as kind of like this bar broad, beer swilling, vodka drinking kind of barfly. And I loved her. Both of them are great. This is a real Chevy, real antique car. I forget what year. I want to say it's like a 57, somewhere there. You auto experts will probably know better. But again, art design and art production. Now, this scene here is what really caused a lot of commotion, even with the directors who thought of cutting it. And it was Cloris who put her foot down and said, no, this scene needs to stay. And it's because the word nigger is used. Because my grandmother freely used the word. When I ask her, why is Charlie's skin darker than mine? She replies matter-of-factly, well, he's a nigger. And when I tell her, the little boy tells her, well, Mom says that's a bad word, she's like, no, we used it all the time. The niggers were always good to me and my mom growing up. And that doesn't make it right. But what I'm trying to say is this scene, when the boy uses the word, this scene is where a woman is actually confronted with her own racism. And she tells him, you know what? Don't say nigger. Say coloreds. Like that's any better. Okay? But that's the whole point of the scene. It wasn't written for laughs. It wasn't written to offend. It was a real dialogue that took place in which the boy is actually educating his grandmother. And in screenings and previews and all of that stuff where we had Q&As at the end, you know who are the most offended by this scene? Uptight white people. The African American groups that they laughed, they chuckled at this, and they stood up when people talked about it and said, we totally get that. We understand. It didn't cause any commotion, only among uptight white people. So I just wanted to throw that for the good of the order. My grandmother used to love to sit up and watch horror movies. Here is Carnival of Souls, which used to be on, I swear, like every other Friday night on some late night syndicated channel. And we would sit up and watch Channel 5, Channel 9, Channel 11, the CBS late night movie, all for the scary movies. And that Jesus picture that's on the wall above the TV, that's real. And I still have that. And the reason why, I always remember as a kid, I would say to her, no matter where you move in the room, Jesus is always watching you. And you know what she would reply? She'd be like, you're fucking right, he is. That's what she used to say. So here we have a little foreshadowing. He hears a sound. I didn't agree with this. This never happened in real life. And when we show the reveal of what's causing that sound, I'll explain in more detail. But that did not happen in real life. I think coming up right here, right after this, when he's singing, and by the way, those are the nursery rhymes she taught me. Jesus Christ Almighty, mouse ran up my nightie, bit my rump, made me jump, Jesus Christ Almighty. That's what she would sing to me, and it would make me laugh and make me feel at ease, and I'd go to sleep with it. So the scene after this, coming up here, I think, okay, yeah, they're showing this right here. This, of course, is to keep the audience engaged because we are now about 40 minutes into this movie and really no terror things have started. We've seen some odd things so far. And this is where it's wrong logistically, but I get why they did it. My bedroom was on the first floor of this small Cape Cod. Now, my bedroom in the movie is up. If you look to the left, it's up on the second floor to the left, that window on the end. So what they did is they used that the perpetrator here is using the roof of the root cellar to get up on top of the porch roof that would allow access to look into the child's window. And then you heard this. And this really did happen. My bedroom window was open. There was a screen in the window. There wasn't a shade like this, but the shadow really looks good. That's why they did it, I'm sure. but there was this heavy breathing that came through the window, and you can't really hear it in this film, but it went like, and I freaked out. So my grandfather went outside with a shotgun. This kitchen table scene is extremely accurate. My grandmother also always had 7-Up because she felt 7-Up cured everything. If you had a stomach ache, drink 7-Up. If you have a fever, drink 7-Up. If you have diarrhea, drink 7-Up. It all fixes it. But I love, again, the art design. Look at the Formica table from the 50s. This was exactly almost how my grandmother's kitchen looked. And I love the lighting of this too. Dan Wachalonis did a brilliant job lighting these sets. I was just thrilled. Couldn't be more happier with it. But my grandfather giving my grandmother hell, saying again, you're making him watch all these horror movies all the time. And that's what the kid is hearing. And that really wasn't true. Now you're hearing her singing the nursery rhyme again, the Jesus Christ Almighty, to me again. And there's my room. But of course now what they did is they turned the clown to the wall and Godzilla's gone, which will come up later, but not figuring as highly as I wished it would have. This scene right here, ladies and gentlemen, is 100% accurate. I used to stand at the edge of the corn and I'd throw sticks into the corn. And why? Well, because I used to play, there used to be a big weeping willow tree in our backyard. And I used to take the sticks and I'd play like I was Ultraman or Godzilla and I'd fight the sticks. And they were like Ghidorah or some giant kaiju destroying Tokyo. And one time I heard a sound in the corn and I threw a stick into the corn. And then, as you will see here, coming up, he takes this stick and he throws it in. And this really happened. I'll wait for it, wait for it. And there it is. That really happened. When that happened, I went into my grandmother and I said, a dog is in the corn. And I was throwing sticks in the corn. And of course she was like, you didn't go in the corn, did you? And I said, no, but the dog threw a stick back to me. And my grandmother was like, you idiot. Dogs don't throw sticks. So I didn't think much of it, but I knew that something wasn't 100% right. But pretty much how they shot this right here is exactly how it happened to me. Now you hear laughter. This did not happen to me. And there was no abandoned amusement park in the back to my grandmother's home. It was just all corn. We had access to an abandoned amusement park and the directors really wanted it for the production value and the set design. So we used it. It was called Bushkill Park and it's in Palmer, Pennsylvania, in Easton, a suburb of Easton. I guess this works. The way I wrote the scene is not how they filmed it. I think that's the fairest way to say it. In this scene right here, he emerges from the corn. You notice the deeper he goes in the corn, then it's green and the sun is out again, like he's entering some fantasy world, which I do enjoy. I do like that aspect of the artistic kind of construction of this film. But they did this long tracking shot on him. And that was not how it was written in the script. He does enter the abandoned amusement park, but he's following what sounds like our laughter and voices. And you will see people in the script, you saw people running and dashing. And then you start to get the feel that he's being lured, like, kind of like into a trap kind of thing. Here we see nothing. So I had the scene edited differently than it was originally cut because it was originally one single long 4.5 minute tracking shot. I used to ride on those boats, by the way, as a little boy when the park was actually open. And behind him is the carousel, which had one of the oldest carousels in the United States, and it was sold off. But American Pickers did an episode here at Bushkill Park. If those of you who are fans of that show remember, they did an episode at Bushkill Park, and they talked about that carousel. We added some flashbacks here because I just felt that the tracking shot was too long and it wasn't going anywhere. The script originally wrote it that the boy, again, there's something very ominous going on, that it's the girls. They're luring him deeper into the park. And then what happens is he goes into the fun house where the girls actually start to corner him. And what the hell are they going to do to him? And then he realizes and he wakes up that he's in deep danger. And he was being hypnotized almost by the girls, and they were showing him pornography and things like that. And he fled. And it's a very ominous built-up scene. but it wasn't shot that way. They changed it to give us this with some flashbacks. We put that in. The mouse thing in the can actually really happened to me in real life. And when I did come home, I did find that that was when my parents announced that they were separating. And so I was all down about it. And then when I went out to the can to find the mouse in the can, I guess either there wasn't a lot of water in the can because I found him down by a stream and I caught him. But the mouse was dead in the can. And I don't know if it was because the mouse stressed out from fright or if he drowned, but that's what you're referring to right here when he's looking down into the can. And I don't know. I can't remember really what caused that mouse. I just remember he was dead. He wasn't dead when I caught him. So in this, he keeps moving toward what are the sounds, laughter, things like that. I don't know why a music box was in the boat pool. Again, maybe are they collecting things? They're stealing out of people's houses? I really don't know. So he follows this laughter, heading deeper and deeper into the park. So, that, again, that the girls and whoever is doing this to the house, like whoever threw the stick, they're fascinated with him and luring him in. There is really no production design right here. What you are seeing is the real abandoned Bushkill Park. That's what it really looks like. And it used to be the big place when I was a child. My father's company, Mac Printing, used to hold its annual picnic there. And we used to go down and you get to ride the rides free all day. And there were hamburgers and hot dogs and all of that stuff. It was a company picnic. And we used to go in there all the time. And that place right there, the Barrel of Fun, it's called the Barrel of Fun that they painted. It never really looked like that before. It used to just be like all this old gray kind of siding. And the fun house looked more like a haunted house is what it really looked like. And in that window to the right, just about where the boy is about to walk, there used to be some kind of like animatronic clown in there. And I remember it never worked. So there was an element of creepiness to this park, even when it was open and functioning and bustling. It used to be a very busy park. But I have a lot of stories going into this funhouse when I was a kid at my dad's picnics, at his work picnics, the stuff we used to do. Because my father, behind that van, by the way, were the bumper cars. But my father used to torture this old lady that ran, I think she was Old Lady Mac, they said that ran the park, one of the owners of the park. And she used to have an eye patch like Snake Plissken, and she held a Chihuahua dog, and she had no teeth, and she took your tickets. And my dad would torture her. Like he'd go in with a revolving barrel, and he'd put his arms up and his legs out, and he'd spin all the way 360. And she'd come at you with a broom and chase you to get out of the barrel. So there were a lot of memories in this place. And that artwork was all in there. None of this was done by production design, except these weird flyers. They were added by art design. But the color of the steps, and those steps would rock. They were put on rockers in real life, and you'd have to go up, and the steps would, toss you back and forth. And the kid, again, is following the sounds of what sound like pornography, almost like sex, girls having sex, leading him to the top where then those sounds start to turn to laughter. And that's when he's going to get the surprise. Personally, for me, I feel the scene goes on way too long and doesn't really have a very powerful payoff, but that's my opinion. Other people feel otherwise, and that's fine. If you enjoyed the film, that's great. These pictures right here were hand painted. They are fantastic to have that kind of a carnival freak show feel, because my grandmother would take me to the sideshows when they did come, and she used to love to look at the jar babies, which were actual dead fetuses that had been deformed and either died at birth or miscarried or aborted, and they put them in like big pickle jars. And my grandmother would take me to those when I was little. And there we go. We see this. I never understood the ringmaster kind of thing, and it does give, I guess, a jolt, but none of this ever happened. So I guess I just want to make that very clear for the viewing and the extras on this right here, that no, none of this ever really happened. So again, tearing back for my grandfather, running, into the corn. And then we create a narrative here where this will go from him fleeing and then falling down. I believe he falls down in here and then wakes up to Charlie talking to him about the corn. So again, you have to make adaptations when you're making a movie. And, while I didn't always approve of the changes made from the script to screen, I respected it because that was the director's choice. It just simply, I think it's safe to say and fair to say, it wouldn't have been mine. This scene right here was also changed from the script, and I do want to point something out coming up. And that is Charlie did in real life take me to the edge of the corn one time because Charlie felt that Gladys, my nanny, really was working overtime to scare me all the time. And he felt that she was constantly, terrifying me, and it was unjust, that, you shouldn't be so afraid of the world as it is, and to use kind of fact and logic to understand things. And in real life, he did take me to the corner. He said, look, here's where things are in the world. Your grandmother's house is here. Over there is your aunt's house, your Aunt Grace's house. And over here is this, like if you went in that direction. And then what he did is he went into the corn with me and he broke off a stalk and he showed it to me and he put it in his hand. Now, for those of you who've been around corn, you know that corn has a kind of like clear, pinkish sometimes sap to it. And when the sap was on his hand, I remember looking at it. And in the script, I wrote it that the boy was seeing blood. Now, it's not really blood. We know corn doesn't bleed human blood or red blood. But to the boy, that's how I wrote it. So we'll get back to that in a moment. These scenes are highly important. These, again, were the dinner scenes. This is really how it happened. There's Tootie talking to her sister Gladys, to Cloris, talking about their other sister, my Aunt Grace, my great Aunt Grace. And when you see this coming up, this was all real. I had cousins like this. It was really as dark as they're talking. And I'll get into all that because talking about it right now, it's better to see it. But Charlie, I remember, was always like, that house over there, Grace's house, was a freak show. And here's where, again, we caught shit because Charlie either grilled or he would bring Maryland fried chicken to the table when he would come up to visit because he loved his fried chicken. And right away we had some critics, stereotype, racism, all that. And again, I'm just going to say bullshit. That was not it at all. And in fact, we contacted Maryland Fried Chicken to send us genuine containers from the 1970s so that we had everything proper. And it worked. Now here, this really happened. They're going out to see my Aunt Grace, which is Gladys's sister. And it's a freak show out there. You're going to see. And Heine would say to my grandmother on her way out there, he would be like, they're going to want to touch him, which means me. And those are my cousins he's referring to. Now, in real life, Aunt Grace lived near the real park, the amusement park. They lived on a creek called the Bushkill Creek. They had no electric. They had no running water. And she did the laundry, and I'm not kidding you. She did the laundry about once, maybe twice a year. That was it. And when her husband died, she never changed the sheets on the bed because he died of a heart attack in the bed. The house was filthy. What you're looking at right here is very much like how the house looked. It was beyond a hoarder house. It was not so much cluttered as it was just dirty and run down. Again, no electric. Now, they added electric to this for the weird blinking light. They wanted that for aesthetic, and I was like, okay, whatever. But there were like dead animals, like in jars, like my cousins trapped and caught animals. In real life, they would have a guillotine. They built like a makeshift guillotine in the barn, and they would make me come into the barn and hold chickens, and they would cut their heads off. Now, they would eat the chickens. They didn't do it to torture them. They ate them. But this was my Aunt Grace that you see here. She used to wear a bad wig, and she had a number of strokes, which paralyzed her, which is why her arm's in a sling, and she couldn't talk. When she talked, it was all distorted, and she was paralyzed, I think, like on her left side. But Gladys either really truly understood her or just pretended to understand her. And they would have these conversations, but the food was disgusting. There were flies in the peanut butter. She would walk around with a gray dish rag, and she would swat the flies with it. And one time she swatted them on a jar of Peter Pan peanut butter, and the flies went down in the peanut butter, and she just left it. So she would serve you crackers and stuff with like flies in them. And I do love this back and forth with Bev and Cloris with the teeth. That was totally impromptu. And it was fantastic because it's just how they were. Put your fucking teeth back in your mouth. Like that's how they talked. And my grandmother, Nanny, like, look at that. I'm telling you, that's how it was. And I would go to the bathroom there. They had no running water in the toilet. They would go out to the creek. My cousins, you'll see them in a minute. My cousins would go out to the creek. And that's real too. That really happened. They would go out to the creek and they would put water from the creek in the toilet. And sometimes there were minnows that they caught. And the minnows would be in the toilet or in a bucket next to the toilet. This is not far off. Now he'll turn around, he'll open the shower. My one cousin, she would go through your purse or wallet and she would find your dollar bills and she would chew George Washington out of the dollar bills and then put your dollar bills back with a hole right in the center where George Washington was. So yes, my cousins were mentally deficient and they were impaired. And this is what you're going to see here. Now, we didn't have a barn to do this in, so they shot it in a basement. But this is real. My cousins would chase these chickens around. They'd catch them, and then they would behead them, and then they would clean them, and they would eat them. So they did not torture the animals. I know some of you are all probably outraged by this already, but it wasn't like they just sat in a barn and tortured animals. They were getting dinner is what they were doing. So I would go in, and my one cousin was really fascinated with me. Her name was Oli. That's her, Olivia, but they called her Oli. And she had become, here she is, you'll see here. She had become severely burned. She was burning trash one time. She had a vinyl jacket on, and the fire caught her sleeve, and she panicked. And she flung her arm all over, and molten vinyl went on her face and into her eye and burned her eye right out of the socket. And so she was blinded. They had to close her eye up and sew her eye up, and her lip was all burned and inflamed, and they stitched her up. But I mean, it was kind of like Freddy Krueger on the one side of her face. It was pretty bad. And they would always hug me and they would touch me and they wanted to play with me. And then they would see, and here they're showing that he's holding the chicken, but in real life, they would make me hold the chicken and put its head in the guillotine, and then they drop the blade. But for this, they use a cleaver, and we did have a guillotine. They did. I will say art design, production design did make one, but it didn't really work well, and the chickens weren't all that cooperative, and most of all, the directors also felt that it was stressing the chickens out pretty badly. And here's another thing. I don't know if this still holds, but according to the SPCA, you can do whatever the fuck you want to chickens. They don't care. Like when we said, okay, when we called the SPCA out for the raven and the dogs and even the mouse, they showed. But for the chickens, they were like, no, you can do whatever you want. I said, you mean like, we could set fire to these things? You don't care? They're like, no, they're chickens. We don't care. I find that really hypocritical and weird. I love this scene here because it shows the old TV, which was an actual genuine, real old 70s TV. And my grandmother watching The Killer Shrews, if you remember that movie. Again, watching her 50s B horror movies. I'm building a new Godzilla, and it's here where I'm getting some backdrop from Heine on the status of my family, how certain things came to be with my real father's past. And here's my father who loved his cars. He loved his muscle cars. And he would come visit me, and he loved showing off his cars, and he loved taking me for rides in his cars. But this scene is particularly important because he brought me a BB gun. And just so you know, the BB gun that he's about to pull out of the trunk is the actual real BB gun that he got me. I still have that BB gun to this day. And he loved taking me shooting. My father was an excellent marksman, and he would take me target shooting. He tried teaching me to hunt, but I felt so bad. I killed a rabbit one time, and I felt so awful, and I cried and cried and cried that kind of stopped right there. It never went any further. He wanted to take me deer hunting and things like that, and it just didn't work. And props again to the art department. They found it in the actual box, which I hadn't seen in, my God, forever. But they found an actual box for that gun from 1973. The BB gun is not working well here. I mean, it didn't have much air left to it in the pump. However, the cans, the bottles are being pulled off that by a fishing line to make it look like. So you're hearing sound design with the tink, and then the BBs hitting the can. It's not really real. What was going on is they were pulling them with fishing line off the thing. just to recreate, to make it look like that, they were shooting these cans. But this scene is important because it shows a good bonding between father and son, because both my parents would come visit me back at my grandparents' farmette. So I rather stay there with them, because then you didn't hear a lot of the arguing and stuff. And again, the family dynamic around the table, bravo to the directors for keeping all of that intact and really showing what it was like. Because this is how it was. When he bought me that BB gun, here she is telling me, oh, you'll pop your eye out like a grape. My grandmother never left the fucking house. And yet she seemed to know all these sordid, horrible stories that, oh my God, did you see where that kid up in Scranton got locked in the refrigerator? Oh, Jesus Christ, did you see where that little girl got abducted? I mean, she read the news and she read National Enquirer, but it wasn't like there was an internet at the time and you had 3 channels on TV. And yet my grandmother knew all this dark, sordid, scary information. She absorbed it, and she knew everything that everybody was doing. She knew what was going on up in my mom's town. It was just amazing for somebody who never left the house, how she was able to know so much and watch, and again, keep her eye on these sordid headlines, all of them used to terrify me. My mother argued up until really the time that she died that my grandmother was at fault for the reason why I couldn't swim. Because when we did go to her cabin, my grandmother and grandfather had a cabin up in the Pocono Mountains, and there was a lake called Monroe Lake. And my grandmother would tell me, don't go in the water, because if you go in the water, I can't swim. And if you drown, then she described to me what drowning victims look like. And so I was constantly terrified all the time. She used that same apparatus to keep me out of the corn. So there was so much going on here in the way of fear. Fear was a constant thing. Watching horror movies, terrifying me to stay out of the corn, stay out of the water, all of that stuff. And again, here we are watching horror movies, watching Night of the Living Dead. We loved watching this kind of stuff. And she would look at me. I remember the night when she was watching one of these, and I was afraid to watch the horror movie anymore because of the things that I'd been seeing in the corn and the stick. All of that was kind of catching up to me. And it's leading up to about, what is about to come. And we did shoot a scene, but it didn't work. And I don't know why it didn't work. But after the breathing through the window, another night, the perpetrator or perpetrators came to the window and they scratched and raked their nails up and down the screen and rattled the screen in my bedroom window, which terrified me. And I started screaming again, and my grandfather ran outside with the gun. And, that's when I heard him come in and say, there's more than one. I remember him saying that. So the dogs would get my grandfather up. And it didn't happen exactly like this in the movie, but it's a good way to do it. The dogs did disappear. We can't 100% say that whoever was doing this to the house did this to the dogs, but it seems pretty coincidental. The dogs just never came back, and we found, my grandmother found one of their collars in the yard, which that scene will be coming up soon. But my grandfather, if you saw earlier in the film, Heine loved his dogs. He just worshiped these small little dogs. And every night during the evening news, he would sit down at the table with ice cream. I remember it was Neapolitan ice cream, the chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry. And with a spoon, he would feed those dogs right out of that ice cream box. And my God, how he loved those dogs. So when the dogs went missing, he was a mess. And he worshiped those animals. And I remember they would always say whenever they lost a dog, they'd be like, no more goddamn dogs. That's what Nanny used to say. No more goddamn dogs. And a week later, we had another goddamn dog. And a lot of you are probably nodding as you listen to this going, yep, that was my grandparents. Now, coming up here in this scene, this is great. Heine goes out looking for his dogs. However, what's coming up with the boys' bedroom, this did not happen. And I always felt that it created a logic gap in the film. And again, most of you have watched it, and if you've enjoyed it, it probably really doesn't matter all that much because it's for the sake of the story. And I understand why the directors did it. But from a reality point of view, I never felt that it really worked right. And you're going to see here as they, pan down as he lies down here. Just hang on here a second. The camera will start to move and we'll get right to it. I think this is where it happens. He heard the spring again. And will it move? Yes, it does move. And down it goes. This never happened. And it defies logic, because if the pretense of the whole thing is the outsiders trying to get into the house, then why are they having such a hard time if they can just get in undetected? And why is the guy under the bed? And another question that people ask me all the time is the ringmaster the guy that was at the barn? And the answer is yes. But in real life, there was no ringmaster. There was just the guy at the barn. To be fair, I can't confirm if it was the guy at the barn because we never saw him when the stuff started happening at our house. So the directors turned this guy into a ringmaster. And I think because it lended itself to a creepy kind of thing. And most of all, it wasn't a clown. I really fought against the clown thing because, between it and then, even John Wayne Gacy, a lot of people in the advent of the internet, they love to talk about how clowns scare them. Clowns are so terrifying. I'm going to call bullshit on a lot of that. Yeah, I think clowns probably creep some people out. And I think clowns probably scare a few people. But overall, I don't think people have the phobias over clowns that they like to claim. They just like to say it because it gets them attention. I really do believe that. I mean, I'm not a fan of clowns either, I guess. But they don't terrify me. They don't scare me. And even when I was a child, they didn't do that. I think, again, that's just people going, look at me. But I digress. Here we are again, back with Eugene, talking about, that, there were hippies out in the fields and, things are bad. And he's hearing kind of things in his head and all of that stuff. And, people have done bad things. And maybe he's alluding to the fact that he did bad things. This conversation never happened. They're looking for Bob, the farmer, which again did not exist. There was a full running dairy with an upfront store. We never had this conversation with the real Eugene. But again, he would find me wherever I was at the farm. So this is just, again, and I get it, to increase the narrative and to keep the audience engaged. Now, this scene, although I never saw it happen, I imagined it did go down something like this. My grandmother loved hanging wash. She loved doing the laundry. She kept a very, very clean house, opposite of what Grace's house was like, as you saw, where my cousins lived, which was filthy. My grandmother hated dirt. And I swear, she was like doing laundry every day. Whatever could be washed, got washed. And we even had a washer that had the old wringer that you put the clothes through and it went ing, 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 and wrung them out. Here's where she finds the collars, the dog collars. And look at Cloris's face here. Dan Wachalonis' photography so caught everything that is Cloris in this. And you can still see, even at 83, she's still such a beautiful woman. And that's what I love. No wrinkles. I mean, no cosmetic to fight the wrinkles. No cosmetic surgery. No fillers. No Botox. Cloris always allowed herself to age naturally. That's what I loved about her. And I'm telling you, working with her was an experience. I'll have to tell you some stories coming up when we have a moment where I can fill the gap. But there you see her with that absolute terror on her face. Cloris loved life. She is one of those people that I've met, and I'm telling you, she just sucked the marrow out of life. And she came down, by the way, to a cafe right next to Penny's place. It was a tavern. And one night, she played piano for the customers. She just got up and people came over like, oh my God, is that Cloris Leachman? And they got pictures with her. And one lady came up, would you hold my baby? And she did. And she got photographed with the baby. Cloris was such a giving person, especially to her fans. And she just loved to entertain. But she would always yell at me all the time about enjoying life. She would tell me, you're wound too tight. You work too hard. You need to enjoy life more, because she said, and this was when she was 83, she's not ready to go yet, she told me. She doesn't want to die. She was having too much fun. It was such a moving moment that I had with her one-on-one, and I'm forever grateful for that. This scene here did not happen the way that you're seeing with the girls shoving what are probably the dead dogs in the back of the van. But this girl did torment me at my grandfather's truck. She didn't sing the rhyme. They used that for the film, but she did come up and torture me in the car. Like, what are you doing, little boy? What are you doing, little boy? What are you doing, little boy? Why don't you come out, little boy? And I wouldn't leave the truck. And then Pappy came out, Heine came out and scared them off. And this is where I believe it starts. And the night that it did, it happened differently than the way that they're setting it up here. But it is a good reveal here. I like what they did with the narrative. However, in real life, we were watching the news, I think it was late one night. It was like the late news, like the 11 o'clock news. And what came through the window was not a pumpkin. And what came through all the windows were not pumpkins. They were large clumps of dirt that the tractor tills up and becomes like big rock, and they threw those through the windows. So here they use pumpkins because they're using, Heine's garden really as a weapon against him. And all of this is fairly accurate here. Heine came down, my grandfather came down with the shotgun, and he had military training. He was in the army. He did serve in Germany. And he was out the door. He told Nanny to lock the door, and he was out the door with the shotgun. And he did fire off shots. So I didn't get to see how this all happened. I just heard it from being inside. But I love the way that Bev walks here. He walks in a proper military stance. He grabs the rocks to create kind of like a diversion to fool whoever is torturing us. But we did call out the police, and this is a great story while this is going on. After this movie released, an Easton Borough, or it might have been a Forks Township Borough policeman contacted me. And he said, we do have a police report from coming out there. He goes, I saw this movie. And he goes, I remembered my dad talking about it. And he became a cop at the force. And he said, I remember my father talking about this. And sure enough, he looked in the old files and there was one police report. There were multiple reports. But he said they still had that on file about how they came out for an incident that happened that night right here. And I got to see it. I have it scanned somewhere. I'm going to have to post it somewhere online because I still have the actual scan of the police report. I was so thankful that he reached out to me to, because it verifies. Because again, in this right here, I'm telling you the stuff that really happened versus what really the filmmakers took liberties with. Now, my grandfather did have an attack. It was not a heart attack. It was kind of like, I guess, angina. He did have pain in his chest, but he did not have a heart attack. This did happen, and I'll never forget my grandmother's face. They captured it so well here when we found my grandfather lying on the ground. Like, as much as my grandmother bitched about my grandfather and they argued, she was lost without him. And I still get choked up when I watch Cloris's face here when she sees Heine lying on the ground. And we did get him over. We did get over to him. We did get him back in the house. He refused an ambulance. He refused to go to the hospital. We did call the police. And that's where there will be a difference as well, too. My mother's stepfather, who was the chief of police, shows up in this scene. But that was not real. In real life, it was this Forks Township or Easton two patrolmen that came out. But for the sake of narrative, they brought out the character of Ray, just because then it gives a little bit more backstory on my childhood home and the dynamic between my mother and father. So, I get it. It's another small liberty taken, and it gives Cloris a chance just to be showing a little fear this time around. And again, I do love the dynamic because you do get the two grandfathers kind of squaring off with each other because as bad as things got on my grandparents' farm, I still loved staying there and I didn't want to go home. I loved being with my grandparents all the time. And there were times I missed a lot of school as a result of some of the problems that there were. But we get a good chance to see the two, like I said, the grandfathers square off. And again, my props out to art design and all of that. The the place looks really genuine. It really does. And there's that Jesus picture. As I told you, I still have it. It's down in my basement, and I keep it down there. And I used to say to my grandmother, his eyes follow you wherever. He's always watching. And her reply, as I told you, was, "You're fucking right." But my grandfather was still missing his dogs. The police, when they came out, they were just kind of like, yeah, there's damage here, but there's really not a whole hell of a lot we can do. And keep in mind, this was before cell phones. This was before the internet and rapid communication. They came out, they walked the property, but there really was no evidence to really get anybody. That was the other thing as well, too. So I don't know. I don't know why they never really looked into it deeper. I do know my grandfather told me that the cops did go back to the dairy farm. Did they talk to the real Eugene? No idea. I suspect they must have, because it was my grandmother who felt that it might have been him. She was saying that all along, and I think Heine was putting that in her, because rarely did my grandmother come to the milk farm. That was a run for me and my grandfather. We went up and got the milk and then stopped at the hotel kind of thing. So that was like our little excursion. But I know that my grandmother did believe that if there was a source for this, for these people, it was back at that milk farm. So my father did come out. He did put new deadbolts on the doors. He helped nail up the windows to prevent anybody from getting in, and made it very clear that he was going to start keeping an eye on things. And he did. When you get to the end of the film, that scene pretty much happened. And we'll get to that coming up. But my father decided that if the cops aren't going to do anything, he was going to, start looking into this a little further and try to see if maybe he could catch, because he worked a late night shift. So when he got out of work at 1 or 2, which is usually when this kind of stuff was starting at the house, they always waited till late night, like after 10, 11 o'clock kind of thing. So they would, start up then, and my father would get out around between 1 and 3 in the morning and then drive by. I can't express enough how grateful we are for the people that loaned us all these locations. Without this farmhouse, the film would not have had its authenticity and the feel and tone that it did. And I always loved looking at the photography that Dan did, because don't you think, I hope you agree with me, it has a real 70s kind of feel to it. That's how I feel. It does have a kind of 70s look. It doesn't look like we're trying to make it look the 70s. It looks like it really happened. And especially, notice how clean my father's car is. I want you to keep track of that and notice. My father loved his vehicles, and he made sure that his vehicles were always spotless, both inside and out. They were always showroom new. And when he went to sell them, which was quite often, the people buying them just couldn't believe the condition that they were in. Now, this really happened in real life. I started sleeping in the same bed with my grandmother because of the terrors that were happening. And my grandfather, in the meantime, would sit out on the porch with the shotgun over his lap. He was kind of standing sentry. And they did have a screened-in shanty. I'm glad that the actual farmhouse had that. Ours was much smaller, but it was just like an outside porch that was closed in with screens and a swinging kind of door, like a screen door. This scene here was a bar that was shot. We shot this down in Palmerton, Pennsylvania. And these are all extras in the film. It took us all night to shoot this movie. I believe it was a place called Linda's, if I'm not mistaken. And we had a really good time shooting this. A lot of people got to make the cut here in this film, and including my ex-wife, who was in this film, in this scene as well, too. You can see her in the background coming up here. I think you'll see her. Oh, no, you won't see her right here, but she was earlier if you go back and look. This is a confrontation between my father and one of my mother's friends. This woman is actually based on a real lady that was a real troublemaker in our family that stirred up a lot of gossip and lies to instigate fights with my mother and father. She was really bad news. And I like this scene here because it kind of brings the fictional Barry and Bonnie together to go out to the farm. And this is where it will diverge again. In real life, when my father went out to the farm, the issue was he went alone. He did not go out with my mother. But we need to unite the family, and I understood the directors asking me to change that which I did in the script. I changed it to that my mother would come along. So he got her, he drug her out of the bar. And I'm really proud of Tara Reid. I want to tell you something about Tara Reid real quick. While we were shooting on this set on the farm, there was a dog on the farm that was not kept in the best of condition. And I really just wanted to adopt the dog. And the farmer was like, nope, you're not adopting the dog. The dog can stay there. And the dog was in really bad shape and had been on a chain like its whole life. And Tara helped me. Tara went to bat for me to the farmer to get that dog. And I did. I took that dog home where she stayed with me for the last 4 or 5 years of her life living in luxury. So Tara Reid helped rescue a dog. So when people go to talk shit about her, always remember that. If you listen to my podcast on the assassination of Tara Reid, you get the full story there. So hop on over to my cinema podcast and have a listen. This scene here is about as close as you can get to pulling this out of my memory banks. I was not here the night they shot this, and when I saw it in the cutting room, I couldn't believe it. This is how it was lit. This is how it was in my mind. The directors so well interpreted this from the script page. I went out to get 7-Up, because again, that fixes everything. And I remembered looking at the lock on the door, wondering, is it locked? And while this was going on, there was somebody coming up on the porch after Heine, who was asleep on the front porch, on the screened-in shanty porch. And I remembered walking over to the door, and the kitchen was lit by this little kind of like neon fluorescent light over the stove. They got the lighting perfect here. And the door suddenly rattled as I approached it, and everything went to hell. All things broke loose. I started screaming. My grandfather ran in. And most of all, if you watch this right here, I'm telling you, this is pretty much how it happened. I remembered him firing the gun from the kitchen outdoors. It rang my ears from the blast. This was what it was like. And you know, during a screening of this at a Q&A afterwards, this one woman stood up and she was trying to have her like Karen moment, in my opinion. And she started like attacking me, saying, oh my God, my daughter will never be able to watch, look at cornfields ever again, that kind of thing. It's like, well, then what'd you bring your daughter for? Didn't you see the poster? Didn't you understand what this was about? And most of all, there's no blood or gore in this. There's really no sex in this. There's really not a lot of violence in this. But this woman was having her moment. And she said to me, she said, you act like you're proud of this. Why didn't your mother get you therapy? Why weren't you taken for counseling? Well, first of all, this is 1973. And really, a lot of that kind of stuff didn't exist at that time. And for me, I dealt with it. So I don't know what, you're trying to put my parents on trial, my mother or my grandparents on trial here. And she was looking for that like Oprah Winfrey, Jerry Springer kind of applause, audience mentality thing. And then, she attacked me for, the nigger reference, in which some African-American people stood up and said, if we don't have a problem with it, you should not either. Again, like an original Karen before there were Karens. And the other thing that I told her was, I said, maybe you should watch Disney, like the Jonas Brothers movie. I told her, because she said, oh, we love Disney. And I said, well, you saw the Jonas Brothers movie. And she said, we did. And I said, well, maybe you like the idea of the Jonas Brothers coming out with those big hoses between their legs, spraying white foam all over the face of the little girls. Or maybe The Secret Life of the American Teenager on Disney's ABC Go network. A different kind of family where we talk about oral sex and children out of wedlock and unwanted pregnancies. Yeah, that's real family. So I was calling out the hypocrisy of all of this because, look, say what you want about horror. Horror is an honest genre. It is there to excite and stimulate you. That's all its job is. It doesn't have an agenda. It's not there to preach politics or religion or anything like that. Horror is out to stimulate you, whether that is scare you, make you jump, laugh, scream, whatever. Stimulation is the goal. Disney, in my opinion, has an agenda. And they try to pass their stuff off as family, and most times it really isn't. So when I kind of responded in that way, I responded and I got in far more detail about it. And you can also hear about that on my cinema podcast. I believe it was under When Filmmakers Strike Back or Critical thinking, I think, is what it was under. You can listen to that about a review that came out for The Fields, which called me a racist because of the scene where the little boy says, why is Charlie's skin color darker than mine? And Gladys replies, because he's a nigger. And this guy said something like, Harrison Smith thinks it's funny to play for laughs, an old lady saying the N-word. No, you missed the whole point of it. You didn't get this at all, you 24-year-old film reviewer that knows nothing about film. And Cloris was another one who told the directors, if you cut that scene, we're going to have a problem because this scene needs to stay. So this ending scene right here is pretty damn accurate with my grandfather having the issues. The only difference is I did not run out of the house. We needed a big moment where the boy confronts his fear. And I get it. The directors really wanted a kind of big oomph ending because really in real life, it just ended. After this attack, everything just stopped. So you need to fill in those gaps for the audience. You just can't kind of do this and then it stops and it's over. Then the audience feels ripped off. So the little boy takes his gun out, pretending to be his father, who he worships. And of course, we have this kind of big ending. None of this right here happened. And I just think, again, as the writer and the person who lived this, it is fair to tell the audience this. And hopefully it doesn't take away your enjoyment from it. But you have to do something with it. So I get why they did it. It adds a lot of fun suspense, really creates a kind of, nail biter kind of ending and a bit of a payoff here, which you've been sitting through this entire movie now. I mean, we're at an hour and almost 30 minutes. This movie runs a little longer than that. You got to give the audience something. So I definitely understand why the directors chose to do this. So I wrote it according to what they asked for. They said, could you just kind of punch some things up a little bit and give us something where we get Stephen into the corn, which will allow, the family to kind of reunite. I got it. So this right here, none of this happened, although I do love Cloris's reaction when she realizes that Stephen is taken off out of the house and sees him running into the corn. And then we have this shot coming up here where the parents arrive. And that's all important because, again, it's about the reunification of the family. You have to have something positive for the audience to get behind. So it's always smart to use your critical thinking when watching what you think are based on true stories. I'm the first one to call bullshit on based on true stories. So that's why I'm letting you know this was real, this was not. I'm not trying to pass all of this off as a single coherent true story. So now we have this. This did happen right here. My father came home from work one night and a shadowed person jumped out of the porch and landed on the driveway where my father took his Mustang and drove right into the corn after the perpetrator because my grandfather was asleep on that porch. What were they going to do? What would have happened had my father not come? So that's pretty scary when you think about it. There's a lot of what ifs with this story. And then I'm going to get to in a moment what the psychologist told me at the dinner party. I told you I would circle back to that. But this scene here, we also had to change our schedule. We had to shoot this earlier because the night after we shot this scene, we got an October snowstorm. And this is supposed to take place in September. There should be no snow on the ground. We had to shoot all the final exterior shots. We had to move everything up. And then the night we got the snowstorm, we shot all the interior scenes like at Stephen's home and all of that because we had snow coming. So the parents do reunite here, and that's great. And we give the audience what they want. They get out of the car. None of this, again, ever happened whatsoever. But it does provide that moment. Now, while this is going on, I'm going to tell you that psychologist story. So I was at this dinner party, and they were like, oh, you made The Fields. And a lady came up to me, and she said, oh, I really enjoyed that film, but I have a couple theories. She goes, did this really happen? I said, yes. And I explained to her, kind of like I'm explaining to all of you, of what was real, what wasn't. And then when I was done, she said, well, do you want my take on things? I said, I'd love to hear that. And she felt that Eugene, the guy at the milk farm, definitely had some type of fetish for me, probably a sexual interest or obsession with me. But somehow she feels, just from watching the movie and then what I told her about the real Eugene, felt that he didn't want to act on it. And that by coming to the house and terrifying me was kind of like a sexual release for him. And did he bring the girls? Quite possibly, because they did know things. And most of all, my grandfather did say that night, there's more than one. So what happened was that each time the terror kind of ratcheted up because he was growing more frustrated, that he was actually trying to work his way into the home. Now think about it. He could have abducted me at any time in the yard when I was playing out back, like the day with the stick, but was that him? Was it one of the girls? I don't know. However, she felt he was working up the muster, fighting against these urges to actually get in the house and kidnap me. She felt I would have eventually been abducted if it didn't end the way that it did. And she thinks in the movie, the directors allude to the fact that it was probably the girls and those helpers. Remember the guy in the mirror at the van? That it was them who killed Eugene because he was feeling bad about what was going on and he didn't want to see the little boy hurt. That's what we allude to in this scene right here that you're seeing with Tara and Faust and Joshua moving toward. They're hearing the sound of, like, it sounds like a rope or suspension, like belts being cranked, that kind of thing. And the movie ends with Eugene's body dropping down and it looks like he was hanged. Now, did he hang himself or did the girls and their cohorts, did they do it? Now, in real life, I'm going to tell you the real life ending. This is why the directors wanted it to go this way, to give you action. In real life, the real Eugene did hang himself. And it was deemed a suicide. It was legally on the books as a suicide. Now, was there foul play? Doesn't seem to be. But after it happened, that was it. Everything at our house, all the torture, all the terror, it just ended. And my grandmother was like, it was that son of a bitch at the milk farm. I knew it. So here, the body drops and it provides, provides a good start. You give the audience something. Again, I don't agree with the ringmaster thing, but again, that's the artistic license of a director. But did Eugene really do it? Or was he killed and strung up there, kind of thing, by the girls? We don't know. We kind of leave it up to you to decide. Well, the directors do. I didn't direct this. Here is the big ending. The big ending is when, they kind of realize, they look in the newspaper. My grandfather did get new dogs. You can see now the sun is up. It's orange. It's not gray and overcast. The threat is gone. The terror is gone, right? Just what the directors were doing artistically, which I really enjoyed. And we'll go to the house where, of course, they'll be feeding new dogs. My grandmother is always reading the newspaper. You can see the windows are back intact. And she will read that, the guy committed suicide. And here she is actually, kind of giving in a little bit, allowing the new dog to eat from the bowl because she was always giving him hell. So it's showing that, again, a new leaf, a new day, that kind of thing, that there is hope. Because in the original story, in the original script, it was kind of left on a very dark note. So they wanted some kind of hope, especially for distribution, that audiences would want to see that maybe things get set right in the very end. So here's Gladys showing the newspaper. Also read the byline, if you will, real quick. You'll see there, just take a look in the newspaper. That's me. That's my name. That's a little Easter egg right there. So I wrote the article, kind of thing. So another one of my cameo appearances. And here at the end, we see Stephen. He's shooting his dinosaurs. And I changed a lot of this because that corn scene that I told you about, where Charlie broke off the corn and it's sap and in the boy's view was blood. There was a scene where they shot where he was shooting his BB gun and he hit a piece of corn and it was bleeding human blood. And I didn't like it. I thought it kind of shows that the corn is actually bleeding blood. And I remember in test screenings, a lot of the audience always get confused at that because it's kind of introducing a supernatural element into a film that's all based in reality. There are no aliens here, no demons, no ghosts, no nothing. So that scene never stayed. We kept it that it was just, it was his vision, but then that never got shot. So I dropped the shooting of the the cornstalk scene with the stalk pumping blood. That's a deleted scene, but it never made it to the final cut. I wanted that out. This is my idea right here, the stick coming to fly at the camera, because originally the cut ended just with a fade to black and there was no singing. I added the girl singing, and then I added the stick coming at the camera to give you one last jolt to show that maybe Eugene's dead, but the girls are still around. Notice the sky is gray again. So the threat isn't ever really truly gone. And there's your stick. So there's my commentary, folks, for The Fields. I could do an entire book on the making of this movie, and I could talk hours and hours more about it, but I won't. Most of all, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoy my work, and I'm really grateful for all of you that have supported my films throughout the years. More are definitely coming, and again, thank you. This is Harrison Smith for my commentary on The Fields, starring Cloris Leachman and Tara Reid.